shop at Keynote and then save money. Sure. You don't even want to talk like here. You don't even want to talk. Good. He had knee surgery away, arthroscopic hip, meniscus stuff, and so he had arthroscopic. So he's recovering. Yesterday, like about an hour before I saw you guys, he already has all that. Last week, for the first time, he's really happy. He's right away. I get it. Still hurts. It's still losing the word. 5 months. It might take a year. Yeah, it's not an asshole. He'll need knee replacement. We're just going to try it. Yeah, and you know, they say they last Sorry, Ralph. We're here.
Hello again.
Hi.
I'm still Ralph. For those of you that have never been to the annual meeting of the Shakespeare Association of America, here is a brief list of its many pleasures. 1, seeing dozens of friends who share your love of Shakespeare. 2, meeting dozens of new friends who share your love of Shakespeare. 3, wandering through the book exhibit. 4, the hotel bar. Here are its 2 main aims. Finding the best restaurant to go to and people who are willing to go with you. And 2, choosing the paper session where the best paper happens. That's because the conference is so big that paper sessions are concurrent. Huge paper sessions are concurrent. One way to deal with that is to gamble on a paper at one session and then after that paper slip in at the back of another session in time to hear another promising paper. That's the gamble I took in D.C. and I knew I had lost when I slipped into a chair beside Sarah Imlow and she said, "You just missed the best paper." That paper was David Sterling Brown's White Hands gesturing toward Shakespeare's other race plays. But Sarah, who knows how to fix things, gave me another chance by saying, we should invite him to give a keynote at the Blackfriars conference. So here he is. Dr. David Sterling Brown is assistant professor of English at Binghamton University, SUNY, where he is a scholar, teacher, activist, and currently finalizing his book, Shakespeare's Other Race Plays, an introduction. David's work is an exemplar of the maturation of Shakespeare's studies into the greater world. He embodies the understanding that for those of us that want Shakespeare in the lives of humanity, the ivory tower and the open theater are merely headquarters. Achieving that Shakespeare in humanity requires not only seeing others in the play, but also seeing our invisible selves. Making Shakespeare matter today requires an advocacy beyond the study of the rehearsal room, the study or the rehearsal room, a walking of the talk apparent in David's other projects. His course, Early Modern Literature, Crossing the Color Line, and an article of the same name in Radical Teacher that, and this is his words, explores how instructors can use their scholarly interests to transcend identity politics and construct a methodology and pedagogy that connects the academic to the personal and experiential. We see that activation of scholarly interest in his membership on the Shakespeare Association of America's new Diversity and Inclusion Committee, in his co-organizing SAA Allies, a mutual mentoring initiative, and we see it in his Folger Library NEH-sponsored grant for diversifying Shakespeare, engaging students beyond boundaries, and in the University of Arizona engagement grant on the intersections of diversity and technology. So your lot here in Stanton is better than mine was in Washington. You are here in time to hear the keynote address on power, privilege, and Shakespeare's other race plays. Please join me in welcoming Dr. David Sterling.
conversations that they had with me last night about the theater world and the importance of diversity, inclusion, and race conversations that need to happen. So that made me even more excited to be here to share this talk with all of you. You'll note on this first slide here some Twitter information in case any of you are live tweeting or want to tweet later. My Twitter handle is down there on the bottom right. It's @_ the brown print _, and the hashtag for Shakespeare's other race plays is #ShakesORP. So during a plenary talk I delivered at the annual Shakespeare Association of America meeting earlier this year, I introduced a new critical framework called Shakespeare's Other Race Plays, or the ORP. Today's talk builds on those evolving ideas, which form part of my first book project, and will also appear in Arthur Little's White People in Shakespeare volume, and Arden's Hamlet, The State of Play volume. The ORP paradigm calls attention to how discourse that includes attention to Titus Andronicus, Othello, The Merchant of Venice, Antony and Cleopatra, and The Tempest, also known as the race plays, couches this group of plays as the critical playground for participating in conversations about race. At SAA, I asserted that while the rhetorical race play categorization has been incredibly useful for the necessary conversations that establish the Shakespeare and Race Foundation on which much scholarship stands, conceiving of Shakespeare's race plays, a phrase I hesitate to call a misnomer given its relevance and past utility, deludes us into believing that it is only these few plays that center on race and enable us to have the most fruitful conversations on the subject. So you'll see I brought my own dictionary with me today. As a new framework, Shakespeare's ORP, what I define as dramatic works that contain a completely or predominantly white set of characters and still permit generative discussions about race, serves as a productive second step that ensures the conscientious expansion of race work in Shakespeare and early modern English studies. Moreover, this new framework divorces us from logic, rendering whatever is not white or solely about whiteness, that is, whatever is about the marginalized, to be about race. Shakespeare's go-to race plays and characters, namely Aaron, Othello, Cleopatra, Shylock, Jessica, the Prince of Morocco, and Caliban, are not the only works that should be central in early modern race studies discussions. I firmly believe that conscientiously exploring race in the ORP has significant implications for the study and performance of early modern plays like Shakespeare's. For the remainder of this talk, which will center on two very mundane things, hair and hands, I will position a race play, Antony and Cleopatra, as a counter-example that can inform and perhaps shift our perception of race, power, and privilege in the ORP. With the notable exception of Antony and Cleopatra, Shakespeare's white hands manufacture unambiguous meaning that allows the dramatist to compose a powerful, socially, politically, and culturally significant narrative about whiteness, masculinity, and femininity that Cleopatra's presence subverts. Specifically, the white hand, which belongs to men rhetorically, is a highly scrutinized object and recurring motif in the canon, which does not contain the phrase black hand, predictably so. Beginning with Love's Labour's Lost and ending with The Winter's Tale, two of the ORP, the white hand phrase appears several times in at least 7 plays and across all genres. In these other race plays, as I call them, this corporeal extremity is always unmistakably attached to a white body, specifically a woman's body. The white hand functions as a fundamental agent of white self-fashioning that is inherently feminized, always through masculine articulation, in discourse centered on commitment, love, beauty, virtue, honor, validation, modesty, sexual purity, and more. Yet, as Arthur Little observes, however much whiteness seems to communicate an authentic cultural sense of purity, divinity, and power, it remains a theatrical device. I contend that this theatrical device is deployed for maximum racial and rhetorical impact in Antony and Cleopatra and the ORP, an impact that privileges whiteness's symbolic power. Besides Antony and Cleopatra, a number of Shakespearean men speak of the white hand of a lady, which often provides or provided some sense of security for the male figures in the plays. In Love's Labour's Lost, Shakespeare draws out the connection between whiteness and female beauty when Holofernes reads, "To the snow-white hand of the most beauteous lady Rosaline." This point regarding beauty, naturalized by the modifier snow, is bolstered when Verone says, "And Rosaline they call her, ask for her, and to her white hand see thou do commend this sealed-up counsel." It is as though the whiteness of the lady's unstained hand is what makes it, and her, by extension, worthy of male attention. Pandarus, in Troilus and Cressida, moves beyond a superficial reference to the white hand. In fact, his speech showcases a keen fixation on the white hand when he references Helen's hand twice, saying, "But to prove to you that Helen loves him, she came puts me her white hand to his cloven chin." And a few lines later, "Indeed, she has a marvelous white hand, I must needs confess." In addition to complimenting the hand, his concentration on the placement of it suggests it mattered greatly when and how a lady's white hand came into contact with something. The religious undertone of his confession should not go unnoticed either. Troilus and Cressida is not alone in its utilization of the white hand motif as an object of proof and validation. For Henry V's Orléans claims, "By the white hand of my lady, he's a gallant prince," regarding the Dauphin. Furthermore, in As You Like It, Orlando ironically proclaims to the cross-dressed Rosalind, "I swear to thee, youth, by the white hand of Rosalind, I am that he, that unfortunate he." In this instance, the hand functions as assurance of, as well as a kind of insurance for, Orlando's self-identification. In pledges that involve distinguishing something about oneself, the white hand assumes an instrumental role, as we also see in another of the ORP, The Winter's Tale. Reflecting on the past, Leontes reminisces about Hermione's white hand, noting, "Why, that was ere I could make thee open thy white hand, and clap thyself my love. Then didst thou utter, I am yours forever." And even Twelfth Night's Fool, in an otherwise nonsensical reply to Sir Andrew, says, "My lady has a white hand." Despite its randomness, his statement denotes how the lady's white hand is a recognizable racialized symbol whose meaning here is powerful enough to transcend class boundaries, thus explicitly directing our attention to a specific privilege of white symbolism, opportune reification. The white hand is important to the fool, just as it is important to Antony. In the canon, then, Shakespeare illustrates the white hand as indisputable white property, and even male property, that directly and indirectly validates patriarchal power and verifies honor associated with the socio-politically privileged white identity. Even when transplanted onto Cleopatra's black body, as Shakespeare does in the middle of his play when the Roman messenger Phidias touches the queen's hand, the white hand effectively elucidates crucial messages about whiteness. Blackness, which is a distraction in Shakespeare's play, can only be of tangential importance when it is so purposely placed by whiteness. The dramatic usage of blackness calls attention to the play's complex racial dynamics that illuminate pressures created by the black-white Egyptian-Roman binaries. In particular, racial tension in the play appears in entangled color metaphors that become deeply racialized, and are just as complex as the drama's love triangulation that positions the white Roman man Antony at the apex. Before Antony says the word white, in relationship to Cleopatra, he uses the term after abandoning his men at sea in a speech that is indicative of his own wave of internal and external conflicts that derive from his scandalous relationship with the Egyptian queen. Reproaching himself for failing to be a true military leader, Antony says, and that's Cleopatra Cleopatra fleeing. I followed that I blush to look upon. My very hairs do mutiny. For the white reprove the brown for rashness, and they then for fear and doting. Notably, white is only said twice in the play, both times by Cleopatra's lover, whose utterances reinforce racial domination. Antony's blushing denotes a physical response that is exclusive to light-skinned people. For as Aaron reminds us in Act 4, Scene 2 of Titus Andronicus, one of the 5 race plays, blushing is the privilege of whiteness. Antony's blushing and his following feminizes him in a way that affirms Cleopatra's more dominant status in their relationship, turning our attention to a hair rebellion, or the epitome of a bad hair day. Think of Antony next time you have one of those. Antony expresses symbolic language that presents his Roman scalp as the battleground for a race war between the white and brown hairs. In following Cleopatra, who is tawny, Antony's own behavior and rhetoric here mirror the drama's larger conflict between Rome and Egypt, which is a direct consequence of Antony's rashness, fear, and doting. As they reprove each other, visually depicting Antony's internal struggle, the white and brown hairs both exert authority and demonstrate power, but differently. The white hairs, superior symbols of wisdom and experience, capitalizing on the symbolic power and privilege of whiteness, chastise the inferior brown hairs for being reckless, for example. The white hairs embody maturity and paternalism, while the brown hairs exemplify youth and inexperience. On Antony's scalp is the hybridity that later gets mapped onto Cleopatra's body in Act 3, Scene 13, through the white hand that paints the queen herself as a racially hybrid image, a black tawny woman with a white hand. This colored hair metaphor is nappy, certainly not straightforward, because it also implicitly pictures the queen through the sassy brown hair that possesses confidence enough to talk back to the white hair that functions as a surrogate for Antony. On and in Antony's head, and through the brown-haired resistance, Shakespeare subtly uncovers the fragility and instability of white racial superiority by exposing it as merely a mythic ideal, one that Cleopatra herself challenges, especially at the play's conclusion. Now, as Joyce Green MacDonald rightly suggests, the more whiteness remains unannounced, unarticulated, the more it may be said to be in operation. Not merely about skin color, early modern whiteness works to naturalize and normalize the operations of existing hierarchies of race, nation, and sexuality. Whiteness articulates cultural authority. And I argue that the power of whiteness is heard most loudly, is uttered most effectively through silence. Antony's 3:11 mutiny speech solidifies the hardly racialized connection between brown and white that Cleopatra initiates with her concerns about Roman Octavia's hair color in Act 2, Scene 5, and Act 3, Scene 3. After learning that Antony has remarried, Cleopatra wonders if his wife, Octavia, is true competition. This worry supports the notion that there is tension between the white woman and the tawny black woman. As such, it is crucial that when the messenger leaves Rome, he returns to Egypt with a descriptive report on Octavia for the queen that does not leave out the color of Octavia's hair, a rather mundane material item that is nevertheless deemed worthy of serious attention in the play and in this talk, especially because of the racial implications. What Cleopatra does is size up Antony's wife. The matter of most significance is Octavia's hair. The messenger's discourse with the monarch concludes with the following inquiry. Cleopatra says, her hair, what color? The messenger says, brown, madam. The question, what color, appears twice in the play, once about something Roman and once about something Egyptian. At the pre-battle banquet, as Lepidus inquires about Egypt, he asks Antony about the crocodile. What color is it of? And Antony replies, of its own color too. Its own color is, of course, a color that represents Africa. Francois Leroux alludes to the color association when he writes, in Shakespeare's play, Cleopatra is identified with Egypt, and as such, both with the Nile River and its crocodiles and serpents. The return to Octavia's hair brings comfort to Cleopatra because Antony's wife is dark, as in brunette, but she is not dark enough to keep her husband away from his dark Egyptian dish, as Cleopatra is called. In this regard, Octavia too functions as a hybrid image, though one that lacks the exotic sexual appeal Cleopatra has. The queen rules that Antony cannot like Octavia long, because this creature's no such thing. She is, as Charmian quickly agrees, nothing much. The brown hair on the white body is evidence of the play's color-coded tension, amplified by Antony's previously examined hair metaphor. As a racial category in the play, white is portrayed as antithetical to the Africanist shades of difference: brown, tawny, black, swarthy. However, Cleopatra's unwavering confidence in her superiority to Octavia indicates yet again that being a person of color does not inherently mean that one is less than. That is one of the many lessons Cleopatra teaches us. Moreover, the nonchalance regarding Octavia is the queen's assertion of her own racial adequacy. It is her decisive counter to the narrative of absolute white racial superiority that even the Romans' emphasis on Octavia's beauty transmits. For the queen, being whitened, being able to lack black momentarily when Antony chastises Caesar's servant Phidias for touching the white hand of a lady, has a crucial psychological effect, one that can manifest as a subconscious fear of what it means not to be white, what it means to exist in what film director Jordan Peele introduces in his 2017 film Get Out as the sunken place, which represents a perpetual fallen state of racialized disempowerment. And if you haven't seen Get Out yet, I highly recommend that you do, and then see it again. And this gift in the center there is from that film. In Antony and Cleopatra, the black body itself appears as a kind of sunken place, and Egypt too, because both are inferior sites where the white hand reaches out and emerges through blackness. Another way to envision this, the white hand, extending outward from the black body, becomes a foregrounded image that contrasts with and is therefore illuminated and rendered central by the black background image that is the queen's dark body. As I have argued elsewhere, the negative connotation derived from the baseness of blackness can be inverted when we understand base as a term that is synonymous with foundational and strong. While the sunken place functions most obviously as a paralyzing, demoralizing space for black people, it is a foundational space for whites whose sense of entitlement to racial superiority is its own self-affirming form of racial uplift. In the horror film Get Out, black bodies are overtaken and implanted with white agency. Thus, what we get are white people embodied in black bodies that are controlled by white hands and minds. The result is black people trapped inside of white agency, a dynamic that Antony and Cleopatra exemplifies through Antony's whitening of Cleopatra's hand and through Shakespeare's authorial regulation of the queen's mind and body. The white hand scene, where we observe a switch in Antony's treatment of Egypt, as he calls his lover, is a dramatic attempt to put Cleopatra back in her black place, the sunken place. To miss the social, cultural, political, and theatrical power of this particular white hand moment is to render invisible subtly oppressive behavior and silent racism. Presumably, the reason Antony intrudes on Phidias and Cleopatra's exchange is that Enobarbus exits, as the stage directions note, to report to Antony what he hears the queen say, that she submits to Caesar and that her honor was not yielded but conquered merely by her lover, whom she portrays as master rapist. Antony's jealous rage prompts him to highlight implicitly Cleopatra's blackness and explicitly their illegitimate progeny and relationship when he asks, "Have I forborne the getting of a lawful race to be abused by one that looks on feeders?" His declaration that Cleopatra deceives him underscores how he deceives her with his complicated love that, at its core, does not look beyond her black femaleness. He reveals a mindset that is in sync with all the other Romans who reduced the queen to nothing more than a lusty strumpet. Antony cannot resist this inevitable response to Cleopatra because, as Kim Hall argues, the pressures of imperialism insist on the control and regulation of female sexuality, particularly when concerns over paternity are complicated by problems of racial and cultural purity. When Antony tells Cleopatra, "I found you," he gives himself credit for discovering her, and he implies she was essentially nothing before he entered Egypt. His rhetoric recalls Enobarbus's earlier charge that if Antony had not seen Cleopatra, he would have left unseen a wonderful piece of work, which not to have been blessed withal would have discredited his travel. In the role of visual explorer, then, Antony positions himself in a place of power over his appropriated Egyptian territory. The major takeaway is that no one can touch Antony's transformed white property, the queen, unless he says so. He is the master of this feminine possession, so he thinks. And this is how we know that deep down Antony views himself as superior to the queen, certainly in terms of gender, and possibly in terms of race. When Antony feels threatened by other white men, namely Phidias and Caesar, he reacts aggressively towards Cleopatra to control her with his histrionic emotions. When these other men encroach upon his figurative Egyptian territory, he responds defensively and irrationally. Yet, the power he thinks he holds over Egypt accentuates a fundamental double standard that solidifies how he operates with a sense of masculine white racial superiority. I say this because in Act 4, Scene 8, Antony has no problem with another man touching his playfellow, the queen's hand. In fact, Antony encourages it. After returning from battle, he issues an order to Cleopatra and the wounded Scaurus. "Behold this man, commend unto his lips thy favorite hand. Kiss it, my warrior." Antony's possessive use of warrior resonates with the phrase, "my conqueror," which he refers to Cleopatra in 3:11. The hypocrisy is clear, as is the homoeroticism. The queen's imperial hand that was previously whitened and claimed by Antony is now authorized to be kissed by someone who is not the Roman triumvir, or Phidias for that matter. Antony is the broker in this transaction. His sanctioning of and witnessing this kiss is an exertion of his patriarchal power. Moreover, this kiss echoes, and in so doing acts as a corrective to the previous moment that upset Antony so much. Cleopatra, Queen Whore, cannot deny this request, and she does not, as Antony now pimps out her favoring hand in this troubled moment. Since Act 4, Scene 8 occurs after the Phidias white hand scene, the implication is that we are to see from the outset the blackness of Cleopatra's hand until Antony whitens it. In this regard, Phidias literally and figuratively kisses the wrong hand. Conversely, Scaurus is entitled to kiss the white hand, that is now the right hand, simply because of its whiteness. As Antony's playfellow, Cleopatra's hand, which also represents her, is and is not subordinate to Antony. The imbalanced power dynamic between the two lovers becomes most apparent in Act 3, Scene 13, in conjunction with Cleopatra's enforced racial shifting. The queen's white hand, her limited claim to whiteness, makes Octavia her direct foil. The existence of and references to Antony's official spouse remind us of several things. That Cleopatra is not a wife, she lacks the ideal beauty and patience embodied by virtuous white women. She is viewed as a gypsy and whore by all members of the dominant culture, and she is, most obviously, not Roman. Before Antony falls on his sword in 4:14, his last words to Cleopatra are harsh. Infuriated that this foul Egyptian hath betrayed him once more, Antony verbally assaults his lover, threatening to give her over to Caesar, who will display her in the Roman streets, and also let patient Octavia plow Cleopatra's visage up with her prepared nails. The trafficking of Cleopatra's body, first handed to Scaurus and then envisioned as being turned over to Caesar, adds to the air of whoredom perpetuated by the white characters. Moreover, Antony's use of foul racializes this moment, since in addition to meaning physically loathsome, wicked, ugly, and morally spiritual polluted in the period, the term meant dirty, soiled, and full of dirt. To see the foul Egyptian is to see the Egyptian as dark, physically, spiritually sullied. By this point in the drama, Antony's threats against Cleopatra are unsurprising. What is surprising, however, is the fantasy he conjures up about white Octavia inflicting violence on his illicit black lover. Here, Cleopatra and Octavia echo the brown and white hairs that battle on Antony's head. The racialized nature of this female quarrel becomes more vivid in the messy scenario that features white Octavia plowing Cleopatra's soiled-colored skin with her nails. White hands would literally become dirty in this interracial image in which black skin, and presumably black blood, become married to whiteness underneath Octavia's nails. Realizing that he is done for, Antony, who later imagines his and Cleopatra's souls as hand in hand in death, wishes ill upon the queen as he threatens to mutilate her before she becomes Caesar's prized possession of war. This is yet another moment where the lady's white hand acts as an extension of masculine dominance, albeit hypothetically. The threat of disfigurement is interesting because, to an extent, Antony already maimed Cleopatra's body when he rhetorically detached her tawny hand and replaced it with a white one. Or maybe he, like time, just bleached it. While enraged, Antony derives pleasure from the thought of Caesar imprisoning Cleopatra and making money off her black physique that is on display among the common people in the Roman streets. The white man sees the black female's body as profitable and available for economic exploitation. Like her counterparts of color in Shakespearean drama,